I used to say that the secret to a good pot roast was patience. You don't rush it. You don't poke at it every 5 minutes wondering if it's done. You season it right at the start, you trust the heat, and you walk away. The meat does the rest. My mother taught me that. Her mother taught her. And for 43 years, I served that roast every Sunday at the Hargrove table without a single complaint. The Sunday everything changed, I had made it again. The house smelled the way it always did on those evenings, rosemary and wood smoke, the faint sweetness of the apple pie cooling on the counter, the old cedar smell that lived in the walls of the Hargrove country house, no matter what season it was. I'd opened the good wine, set the long table with the cream linen, polished the silver candlesticks that had been a wedding gift from Warren's late father, God rest him. 31 years I'd been polishing those candlesticks. They knew my hands by now, I think. Warren sat at the head of the table, which still gave me a small private ache. That had been Robert's chair. But Robert was gone, and Warren was our son, and I had learned to let things change when they needed to. Bryn sat across from me. She was wearing a cream blouse, silk, I think, or something trying very hard to be, and her hair was pulled back in the way she wore it when she wanted to seem serious. She had that look on her face. I'd seen it before, the look of someone who has been practicing something in a mirror. Their children, my grandchildren, Poppy, 7, and little Reed, 4, were mercifully in the other room with the television, because what happened next was not something I would have wanted them to see. It started the way these things always start. Small. Bryn asked about the Foundation's spring gala. A reasonable question. I had been coordinating it for 11 years, ever since Robert founded the Whitmore, the Hargrove Foundation, and asked me to run the events side while he handled the finances. I knew every donor by name. I knew which ones needed a phone call and which ones needed a personal note on cream stationery. I knew that Gerald Fitch would not attend unless he was seated away from the Donahue family, and that Miriam Cole always needed a vegetarian plate even when she forgot to request one. I started to explain about the venue deposit, which was due by the 15th, and how I'd already spoken with the caterer about Mom. Warren's voice, gentle, the way he got when he was embarrassed by something and didn't want to show it. Maybe we should talk about that later. I looked at him. Then I looked at Bryn. She smiled at me. It was not a warm smile. June, she said, and something about the way she said my name, not Mom, which she had called me for the first 2 years before she stopped, made the room feel slightly colder. I've actually been wanting to bring this up for a while now, and I think tonight is as good a time as any. I set down my fork. I have found, over 68 years, that you can learn a great deal about what's coming by the way someone breathes before they speak. Bryn took a breath. You do so much, she said. You really do. Nobody is saying you don't. But Warren and I have been talking, and honestly, and I mean this with so much love, we think it's time for you to rest. Really rest. The candlesticks flickered. Outside, the wind moved through the old oak at the edge of the property, the one Robert planted the year Warren was born. You've been running this family like it's a military operation for as long as anyone can remember, Bryn continued, and now her voice had found its footing, the way a speaker's does when they realize no one is going to interrupt them. The staff, the foundation, the house. June, you're 68. You should be enjoying your grandchildren. You should be traveling. You shouldn't be on the phone with vendors at 9 o'clock at night. Warren was staring at his plate. Anyone could manage all of this, Bryn said, gesturing with one smooth hand at the room, the house, the whole architecture of the life I had built. It doesn't have to be you carrying everything. The real adults in this family are ready to step up. The real adults. The table was very quiet. The apple pie sat on the counter, cooling. I looked at my daughter-in-law for a long moment. I thought about my mother's pot roast. I thought about patience and heat and knowing when to walk away. And then I smiled. It was, I will admit, one of the finest smiles of my life. Bryn, I said quietly, folding my napkin and setting it beside my plate. You know what? You're absolutely right. I am exhausted. Warren's head snapped up. I've been thinking the same thing for months, I continued, reaching for my wine glass with the steadiness of a woman who has never once let them see her hands shake. And I think it's time I actually did something about it. Bryn blinked. She had prepared for resistance. She had not prepared for this. So, I took a sip, let the silence sit. When would you like to start? I watched the flicker of triumph cross her face before she could stop it. She thought she had won. She had no idea she had just picked up a live grenade and called it a gift. I slept better that night than I had in years. That surprised me, if I'm honest. I had expected to lie awake in the big bed, Robert's side still untouched after 6 years, still faintly his somehow, running through everything in my mind, second-guessing, rehearsing arguments I hadn't made at the table. That was my old habit, turning things over like stones, looking for what was underneath. But I didn't do that. I lay down, pulled the quilt up to my chin, listened to the wind in the oak tree, and I thought, let her have it. And then I slept. I was up at 5:30, the way I always am. The house was dark and breathing quietly around me. I put the coffee on. The good kind, the Ethiopian blend I ordered from a small roaster in Charlottesville that Bryn had once called unnecessarily complicated. And I sat at the kitchen table with a yellow legal pad, and I began to make a list. Not a list of grievances. Not a list of arguments. A list of everything I owned. Not in the legal sense. Robert's will had settled all of that years ago, and my attorney Gwen had made sure the foundation's structure was airtight. No, this was a different kind of inventory. I wrote down every vendor's name, every donor's preference, every staff quirk and scheduling conflict and unspoken rule that kept the Hargrove household and the Hargrove Foundation running the way a fine watch runs, not because the gears are forced, but because someone who understood them had spent decades setting them correctly. I filled 4 pages. Then I made myself a second cup of coffee, called Gwen before 7, she was used to this, and asked her to dust off the consulting agreement template we'd drawn up 3 years ago when Warren had first floated the idea of restructuring the foundation. Gwen didn't ask questions. That was why I'd kept her for 20 years. By 8 o'clock, I was ready. Bryn came downstairs at 9:15, which told me everything I needed to know about how she planned to run things. She was surprised to find me at the dining room table, which I had converted overnight into something resembling a command center. There were 3 binders, color-coded, tabbed, labeled in my neatest handwriting. There was a sealed envelope with every digital password written inside, along with instructions for the Foundation's accounting software, the estate's security system, the staff payroll portal, and the private email account I used for donor correspondence. There was also a single brass key on a Hargrove Foundation keychain, which opened the locked filing cabinet in the estate office where I kept the physical contracts, the vendor agreements, the insurance documents, and 43 years of meticulously organized records. Bryn stood in the doorway in her silk robe, holding her coffee. She'd made it herself, I noticed, which meant she hadn't yet figured out that Clarence arrived at 8 and always had a pot ready, and stared at the table. "What is all this?" she asked. "Everything," I said pleasantly. "Just like we discussed." I walked her through it. All of it. 2 hours, start to finish. I showed her the gala binder, venue, catering, donor seating chart, the note about Gerald Fitch and the Donahues, Miriam Cole's vegetarian plate. I showed her the staff schedule and explained that Clarence managed the house team, but that his Wednesday afternoons were sacred, non-negotiable, because that was when he visited his mother in the memory care facility in Fredericksburg, and any manager worth their salt respected that without being asked. I showed her the Foundation's tax filing calendar with the quarterly deadlines highlighted in red. I mentioned, in passing, that the spring gala venue deposit, $42,000, was due to Bellhaven Estate by the 15th, and that Bellhaven's owner, Patricia, did not accept wire transfers and required a certified check delivered in person, because she'd had a bad experience in 2019 and had never gotten over it. Bryn was taking notes. Her handwriting, I observed, was very fast and not particularly legible. "Do you have questions?" I asked when I'd finished. She looked up from her notepad. Something moved behind her eyes, the first shadow of something I recognized. Not quite worry, the precursor to worry. "I think I've got it," she said. I smiled and slid the brass key across the table. I called Sylvia from the car. I was already on Route 29, heading south, the back seat holding one suitcase and my good cosmetics bag and the novel I'd been meaning to read since Christmas. The Blue Ridge was on my left, going gold in the October light. I had not told Warren where I was going. I had left a note on the kitchen counter, taking some time for myself. "Binders are on the table. You've got this." June. And I had walked out the front door of the Hargrove country house at 11:47 in the morning without looking back. "You didn't," Sylvia said when I told her. "I did. June Hargrove, you absolute—" She stopped, laughed. The kind of laugh that starts somewhere deep and can't be helped. "Where are you going?" "The Keswick," I said. "I have a spa reservation at 3 and a dinner reservation at 7, and I intend to do absolutely nothing productive for the next 30 days. "And your phone?" I looked at it sitting in the cup holder. It had already buzzed twice since I'd pulled out of the driveway. I didn't look at the screen. "I'll check it," I said, "when I feel like it." Sylvia was quiet for a moment. Then, "She has no idea what she just walked into, does she?" I watched the mountains. The oak trees along the roadside were turning, red and amber, and the particular shade of gold that only comes in October in Virginia. The kind that makes you feel, if you're paying attention, that the world is trying to show you something true about beauty and impermanence and the value of patience. "No," I said, "she really doesn't." I turned the radio on. Something old and lovely, a voice I recognized from a long time ago. I let it fill the car. Behind me, the Hargrove estate grew smaller in the mirror. I did not watch it go. I was not there to see it happen, but Sylvia was. And Clarence called her on the 9th day, which was how I eventually learned the shape of it. The precise, almost elegant way that everything began to come apart. I pieced it together later, the way you piece together a storm you slept through, from the aftermath, from the watermarks on the walls, from the way people describe the sound of it. This is what I was told. The first 3 days, Bryn was confident. She moved through the house the way she'd always wanted to, with authority, with purpose, with the particular energy of a woman who has waited a long time to be in charge and has been rehearsing it privately for years. She reorganized the kitchen pantry, which did not need reorganizing. She told Franklin, the grocery delivery man who'd been coming every Tuesday for 11 years, that they were switching to a different service, one with an app, which was more efficient. Franklin, who was 63 and had a bad knee and had always carried the heavy bags to the kitchen counter without being asked, did not protest. He simply did not come back. Bryn didn't notice until the following Tuesday, when there was no delivery. She ordered from the app. The produce arrived in a refrigerated box with the wrong items and a customer service number that put her on hold for 40 minutes. That was day 8. On day 9, she opened the foundation email account, the one I used exclusively for donor correspondence, and found 47 unread messages. Some were routine, some were not. There was a note from Gerald Fitch's assistant, asking to confirm his table assignment for the gala, and reiterating firmly that Mr. Fitch required advance confirmation of the seating arrangement no later than 3 weeks prior to the event. There was a message from Belhaven Estate, Patricia herself, asking when she could expect the certified check for the venue deposit, which had been due on the 15th. It was the 19th. Bryn called Warren. Warren, I was told, said he would look into it. He did not look into it that day because he had a conference call. He did not look into it the following day either, for reasons that were not made clear to Sylvia when she heard the story secondhand from Clarence, who had been in the hallway outside the office and had heard most of it through the door. By the end of the second week, the staff situation had become what Clarence later described to me with characteristic understatement as complicated. Bryn had decided in her reorganizing spirit to adjust the staff schedule. She felt, and she had expressed this to Warren, who had nodded without fully listening, that the current arrangement was bloated. There were, she said, too many people doing too few things. She let the part-time housekeeper go. She told the groundskeeper that his Thursday visits were being reduced to bi-weekly. What she did not know, because it was the kind of thing I had never written in a binder, because some things you carry in your head and your history and your decades of relationship, was that the part-time housekeeper, Donna, was also the woman who managed the foundation's physical mailing list. She did it informally, as a favor to me, because she had beautiful organizational instincts, and I had once helped her son get a scholarship recommendation. And the groundskeeper, a quiet man named Everett, was the one who held the maintenance contract for the estate's septic system and heating unit, because his brother-in-law owned the company and gave us a rate so far below market that losing him meant losing the contract. Donna left without saying anything to Bryn about the mailing list. Everett's brother-in-law's company sent a new rate schedule the following week. It was 40% higher. On day 16, the heating unit made a sound. It was not a good sound. Clarence called Sylvia on a Wednesday evening, not his mother's Wednesday, a different one, and spoke for 22 minutes. Sylvia told me later that his voice had the careful, measured quality of a man who is being loyal to one person while trying not to betray another. He said that Mrs. Hargrove, Bryn, was trying very hard. He wanted that noted. He said she was working long hours and had clearly underestimated the scope of things and was too proud to say so out loud, which he understood, because pride was a complicated thing and he had no interest in judging it. He said the house felt different. I asked Sylvia what he meant by that. She said he'd been quiet for a moment, and then he'd said, "You know how a garden looks when someone who loves it goes away? It doesn't die right away. It just starts to look like it's waiting." I was sitting on the terrace at the Keswick when Sylvia told me this, a glass of white wine on the table beside me, the Blue Ridge going purple in the evening light. My novel was face down on the chair. I had eaten well. I had slept 9 hours the night before. My hands, for the first time in longer than I could remember, were not reaching for anything. I thought about the oak tree Robert had planted the year Warren was born. I thought about Clarence's mother in the memory care facility in Fredericksburg, and whether anyone had remembered to give him his Wednesday afternoon. "Did she give him his Wednesday?" I asked. Sylvia paused. "No," she said. I picked up my wine glass. Outside, a bird was doing something uncomplicated and lovely in the hedge. "She will," I said. "Soon enough, she'll learn what every Wednesday costs." I took a sip. The mountain held its color a little longer than I expected, the way beautiful things sometimes do when you're finally still enough to watch them. Then the light changed, and it was evening, and somewhere back at the Hargrove estate, I knew the heating unit was making it sound again, and no one there knew who to call. If this story is touching you so far, take a second to like the video and subscribe so you don't miss the next ones. And tell me in the comments where you're watching from. I'd love to see how far these stories are reaching. My phone, when I finally looked at it on day 18, had 61 missed calls. I want to be precise about that number because I think it matters. Not because I am a woman who takes pleasure in other people's suffering. I am not, or at least I try very hard not to be. But because 61 is a number that tells a story all by itself. It speaks of escalation, of a slow panic becoming a fast one, of the precise moment when a person who was absolutely certain they were right begins to privately suspect they were not. I scrolled through them on the terrace after breakfast, a cup of the hotel's coffee steaming beside me. Not as good as my Ethiopian blend, but decent, with the kind of unhurried attention I had not been able to give anything in years. I had a notepad. I took notes. Days 1 through 4, nothing. Bryn had been confident then. I remembered. Day 5, 1 call from Warren, no voicemail. Day 7, 1 call from Warren, a voicemail this time. His voice was careful, practiced, the voice he used in professional settings when he didn't want to reveal anything. "Mom, just checking in. Hope you're enjoying yourself. Call when you get a chance. A pause. Everything's fine here. Everything was fine. Day 9. 2 calls from Warren, one from a number I didn't recognize that turned out to be the Hargrove Foundation's main office line, which meant Bryn had gone to the office and tried from there, perhaps thinking a different number might reach me when my personal one wasn't being answered. I found this detail quietly extraordinary. Day 11. 3 calls. 1 from Warren, 2 from Bryn. Bryn's first voicemail to me ever in 11 years of being family. Her voice was bright, almost aggressively cheerful, coated in the specific gloss of a woman who is absolutely not panicking. June. Hi, it's Bryn. Hope the spa is wonderful. You deserve it. Quick question when you get a moment. Nothing urgent. Just about the Bellhaven situation. Call me back whenever. Whenever. Day 13. 4 calls. Bryn's second voicemail. The brightness was still there, but thinner now, like paint on old wood, showing the grain beneath. June. It's Bryn again. Just following up. The gala thing is a little time sensitive, so if you could, just whenever you have a moment. No rush. Thank you. No rush. Warren called on day 20. I answered, because Warren was my son, and there is a limit to what a mother can ask of herself, even a mother with excellent boundaries and a very good reason for the silence. I was in the middle of a facial when the phone buzzed, and I saw his name, and I told the esthetician I needed a moment, and stepped out into the hall in my robe, my face covered in something that smelled of honey and calendula. Mom. His voice, when it came, was not the careful professional voice of the early voicemails. It was smaller than that. Younger. It was the voice of the boy who used to come into my kitchen after bad days at school and sit at the counter without saying anything until I put something warm in front of him. It nearly undid me. I want to be honest about that. Warren, I said, I need to talk to you. A pause. It's bad, Mom. It's actually bad. I leaned against the wall of the spa hallway. Above me, a small speaker was playing something ambient and stringed. Down the hall, someone laughed at something. A real laugh, uncomplicated. Tell me, I said. He told me. Not everything. Warren has never been a man who could fully admit the size of a problem. He gets that from his father. God help him. But enough. The Bellhaven deposit had gone unpaid for so long that Patricia had sent a formal notice of contract termination. The gala had no venue. Gerald Fitch had received no seating confirmation, and his assistant had sent a third message that was no longer politely worded. The foundation's quarterly tax filing, due on the 23rd, had been prepared incorrectly by someone Bryn had hired on a freelance basis from a website, someone who had not understood that the Hargrove Foundation's tax structure had a specific exemption status that required particular documentation that lived in the locked filing cabinet under a tab labeled, in my handwriting, "Do not file without reading this first." They had filed without reading it. The IRS notice had arrived on day 17. Warren's voice, by the time he finished, was very quiet. She's trying, he said, and I could hear in those 2 words the full, complicated weight of a man caught between the woman he married and the mother who built everything he was standing on. She really is trying, Mom. I know she is, I said, and I meant it. We need you to come back. I looked down at my hands. The calendula smell was very strong. Outside a window at the end of the hall, the mountains were doing what they always did, indifferent and permanent and beautiful. I'll think about it, I said. Sylvia drove up the following day with a bottle of the good wine and a cheese plate from the place in Charlottesville, and sat across from me on the terrace for 3 hours while the afternoon moved around us. She didn't tell me what to do. That was why she was my oldest friend. She had never once in 40 years told me what to do. She simply sat with me and let me think out loud and refilled my glass when it needed refilling. She humiliated you, Sylvia said at one point. Not as an argument, just as a fact that deserved to be named. She did, I agreed, and Warren let her. He did. Sylvia was quiet. A bird landed on the railing and regarded us with the frank, unimpressed expression that small birds have, as though they have seen everything and found most of it underwhelming. "So the question," Sylvia said, "is not whether you go back." I looked at her. "The question is what you look like when you do." I thought about Gwen, my attorney, and the consulting agreement she had dusted off and emailed to me on day 3. I had read it twice. It was, Gwen had noted in her accompanying message, airtight. My hourly rate was listed. My scope of work was defined. My authority, while consulting, was explicit and non-negotiable. I thought about Bryn's voice in those voicemails, the brightness thinning like paint on old wood. I thought about Clarence and his Wednesdays. I thought about Robert and the oak tree and the candlesticks I had polished for 31 years. And I thought about my mother's pot roast, patience, heat, knowing when to walk away, and, more importantly, knowing when to come back. I picked up my wine glass. "I'm going to need a good suit," I said. Sylvia smiled. It was a very satisfying smile. "I," she said, "know exactly the one." I left the Keswick on a Tuesday morning, which felt right. Tuesdays had always been my most productive day. Robert used to tease me about it. June runs on Tuesdays the way other people run on coffee. And it was true enough that I'd never bothered to deny it. There was something about Tuesday. Monday carried the weight of the week ahead. Wednesday was its midpoint. But Tuesday was a day with traction, a day that moved. I wore the suit Sylvia had brought. It was charcoal gray, Italian wool, with a single button and a lapel that said nothing loud and everything necessary. I had bought it 3 years ago for a foundation board meeting and worn it exactly once. It fit the way good things fit when you've been taking care of yourself. Not tight, not loose, simply correct. I put on the pearl earrings Robert had given me for our 25th anniversary, and the watch I wore only when I needed to feel like myself, which was a small, elegant thing with a cream face that had been my mother's. I looked in the mirror before I left. 68 years old, rested, calm, ready. I had called Gwen the night before. The consulting agreement was printed, signed on my end, and sitting in a cream envelope in my bag. The good leather bag, not the canvas one I used for errands. I had called Constance, too, briefly, to let her know I was returning. Constance, who had sat on the Hargrove Foundation board for 19 years and who missed nothing, had said only, "Good, come back with teeth." I had laughed. Constance rarely made jokes. The drive up Route 29 was the reverse of the drive I'd taken 30 days ago. The same mountains now stripped further toward winter, the oak trees mostly bare, the sky a high, clear blue that Virginia saves for its best days. I drove without the radio. I wanted the quiet. I wanted to arrive clear-headed and unhurried and absolutely certain, which I was. My phone buzzed twice during the drive. Both times, Bryn. I let them ring. The estate, when I turned through the gate, looked the way Clarence had described it to Sylvia. Not ruined, not dramatically fallen, just waiting. The front boxwoods, which Everett trimmed every 3 weeks without being asked, had gone slightly unruly at the edges, the kind of untidiness that takes a trained eye to notice, but that, once seen, cannot be unseen. One of the stone urns flanking the front steps was empty. The fall plantings I had arranged with the nursery in September, which someone had apparently not followed through on collecting. A gutter on the east side of the house had come slightly loose and hung at an angle that would cause problems by the first hard rain. Small things. But a house is made of small things. That was something Bryn had not yet learned. Clarence was at the front door before I had finished parking. He was wearing his good jacket, which he reserved for occasions he felt required dignity, and his expression was the expression of a man who has been holding something carefully for a long time and is very glad to finally set it down. He did not say anything when I got out of the car. He simply took my bag, which I allowed, and held the door, which I also allowed, and as I passed him I said quietly, "Did she give you your Wednesdays?" He was silent for one beat. "Week 3, he said. when things got difficult enough that she needed goodwill. I nodded. And your mother? She's well, Mrs. Hargrove. Thank you for asking. I touched his arm once, briefly, the way you do with people who have been faithful when faithfulness cost them something. Then I walked into my house. They were waiting in the sitting room, which told me Clarence had warned them, which was fine. I had expected it. Warren was standing near the fireplace with the posture of a man who has not slept well in some time. Bryn was on the sofa, dressed carefully, her back straight, her expression arranged into something that was trying to be composed and not quite achieving it. The room was slightly cold, the heating unit, I noted, still unresolved. I sat down in the wingback chair by the window, Robert's chair when he was alive and mine by inheritance, and I set my bag on the table beside me, and I looked at them both for a moment without speaking. Not cruelly. I was not there to be cruel. But I had learned, over 68 years, that the first person to fill a silence is rarely the one who controls the room. Warren spoke first. Mom. He exhaled. Thank you for coming back. Things have gotten... I know what's happened, I said, pleasantly. Clarence has kept me informed of the broad strokes, and Constance called me about the IRS matter last week. Bryn's chin lifted slightly at the mention of Constance. Good. I want you to know, Bryn said, and her voice was steady. I will give her that I take full responsibility for the things that didn't go smoothly. I underestimated the complexity. You did, I agreed. The directness startled her. She had prepared for graciousness, for the magnanimous older woman who waves it all away. She was not prepared for agreement that didn't come with absolution attached. I'm glad you recognize that, I said. Because what I'm about to propose requires honesty from all of us, and it starts with naming things accurately. I reached into my bag and removed the cream envelope. I set it on the coffee table between us. Neither of them moved to take it. I am not coming back as your mother who runs the house because that is what mothers do, I said. I am coming back as a consultant, a paid one. The terms are in that envelope. My hourly rate, my scope of authority while I'm engaged, and the duration of the initial contract, which is 90 days. Warren stared at the envelope. Mom, you can't be serious. The rate, I continued, as though he hadn't spoken, reflects 30 years of institutional knowledge, active donor relationships, and the current market cost of undoing a significant tax filing error, which I have already spoken to Gwen about, and which is correctable but not inexpensive. I paused. You're welcome, by the way, for that call. The fire was doing something small and steady in the grate. Outside, the bare oak tree stood against the blue sky like a signature. Bryn looked at the envelope for a long moment. Something moved through her expression. Something I recognized because I had felt it myself once or twice in my life, in the moments when the world declines to cooperate with your version of events, and you are left with the raw, uncomfortable fact of your own miscalculation. It was not a pleasant feeling, but it was, I had always found, a very educational one. She reached out and picked up the envelope. What's the rate? She asked. I told her. Warren made a sound. Bryn did not. She looked at the number for a long moment, and then she looked at me, and in her eyes I saw the precise moment that a woman who has spent years underestimating someone finally, begins to revise her estimate. Okay, she said. Just that. Okay. I nodded once, the way you do when a thing is settled. Shall we start with the gala? I said. I believe Patricia at Bellhaven can still be persuaded if someone calls her today with a certified check and a very sincere apology. I looked at Bryn. I'll draft the talking points. You'll make the call. Bryn blinked. Me? You, I said. You're not an intern, Bryn. You're a capable woman who made some mistakes. The fastest way through that is forward. I held her gaze. I'll be right here. It was the kindest thing I said to her that day. It was also, I think, the most devastating. The first thing I had Bryn do was call Patricia at Belhaven. I sat across the desk from her in the estate office. My desk, which still smelled faintly of the cedar oil I used on the wood twice a year. And I watched her dial. I had written the talking points on a yellow legal pad in my clearest handwriting and set it in front of her like a script, because it was a script, and because there was no shame in having one when you were walking back a month's worth of damage with a single phone call. Bryn picked up the pad, looked at it, set it back down. "I can do it without the notes," she said. I said nothing. I simply waited. She picked the pad back up. The call took 14 minutes. Patricia was not warm. She was never warm. It was not her nature. It was one of the things I had always respected about her. But she was professional, and she was persuadable, because she had worked with the Hargrove Foundation for 9 years and knew the difference between an institution having a difficult month and an institution in genuine decline. By the end of the call, the deposit had been arranged, the date confirmed, and Patricia had said, with the particular dryness she reserved for situations she found instructive, "Please tell June we miss her." Bryn relayed this message to me without inflection. "She says they miss you," she said. "They always do," I said, and turned back to the donor seating chart. The days that followed had a rhythm I recognized, because I had set that rhythm myself over 30 years, and it reasserted itself the moment I walked back into the rooms that knew it. I arrived at 8. I reviewed the day's priorities over coffee, my Ethiopian blend, which Clarence had quietly reordered, and then I sat with Bryn for an hour and walked her through whatever needed walking through. She was not a poor student. I want to say that clearly, because the truth matters more to me than the satisfaction of a simpler story. Bryn was intelligent and organized and genuinely capable of absorbing information when her pride was not in the way. The problem I came to understand had never been her competence. It had been her certainty. She had confused the desire to be in charge with the knowledge of how to be, and that was a mistake I had seen before in people far older than 39. But she learned. She learned that Clarence's Wednesday was not a scheduling preference, but a form of dignity, and that honoring it cost nothing and bought everything. She learned that Gerald Fitch's seating requirements were non-negotiable, not because he was difficult, but because he was a man who had given the foundation $400,000 over 7 years and had earned the right to one uncomplicated evening per year. She learned that a certified check delivered in person to Patricia at Belhaven, accompanied by a small arrangement of seasonal flowers, was not an inefficiency, but an investment in a relationship that no app could replicate. She learned, in other words, what I had always known, that running something well is not about control. It is about care, extended, consistent, unglamorous care. There was an afternoon, 3 weeks in, when I watched her spend 40 minutes on the phone with Miriam Cole about a dietary restriction that had changed. Miriam had developed a new allergy, and the caterer needed updating, and there was a whole gentle conversation required to extract the information without making Miriam feel like a burden. Bryn handled it with patience I had not expected from her. When she hung up, she looked at me with an expression I did not immediately identify. Then I recognized it. It was the expression of someone who has just understood something for the first time that someone else has known for decades. "This is what you did," she said. "All of it. Every day. Every day," I said. She was quiet for a moment. "I called you a tired old woman," she said. "You did." She looked at the phone in her hand, then at me. Something in her face was doing the slow, uncomfortable work of revision. "I'm sorry, June," she said. It was the first time she had said my name and meant it. The spring gala was held on the 14th of April, a Saturday, at Belhaven Estate. The dogwoods were out. The evening was warm enough for the terrace, but cool enough for the wraps that Constance always insisted on providing for the older donors, a detail I had taught her years ago and that she had never forgotten. The tables were set with cream linen and tulips, not roses, never roses at a spring event, a small but important point. And the lighting was exactly what I had specified to the vendor, soft and golden, the kind that makes everyone in a room look like the best version of themselves. Gerald Fitch was seated away from the Donahues. Miriam Cole's plate was correct. I stood near the entrance as the guests arrived, not because it was my job. My consulting contract did not technically require attendance at the gala itself, but because these were my people, and this was my foundation, and some things you do not do for money, you do them because they matter. Constance found me at 7:30, 2 glasses of champagne in hand, her silver hair immaculate, her expression carrying the particular satisfaction of a woman who has watched a long game reach its correct conclusion. "To the consultant," she said, handing me a glass. "To the foundation," I said. We drank. Warren came to find me later, after the dinner, when the room had loosened into conversation and the good feeling that comes when an event has gone exactly as it should. He looked better than he had in weeks, rested, relieved, the shadow gone from around his eyes. He stood beside me, and we looked out at the room together for a moment without speaking. "I let her say things I should have stopped," he said finally. "You did," I said. "I thought—" He stopped, started again. "I think I wanted someone else to be in charge for a while. I didn't think about what that meant for you." I looked at my son, 44 years old, and still, in certain lights, the boy at my kitchen counter, waiting for something warm. "Warren," I said, "I know." He put his hand over mine briefly, the way his father used to. "The consulting fee," he said. "It's fair. It's more than fair. I just want you to know I don't want it to be transactional. I don't want you to feel like a hired hand in your own—" "I don't," I said. "I feel exactly like what I am. A woman who knows her worth." He nodded. His eyes were bright. "Dad would have loved this," he said. "The whole thing. He would have thought it was the funniest, most June thing you've ever done." I laughed. A real laugh, the kind that starts in your chest. "He would have," I said. It is May now as I write this. The consulting contract was renewed for another 90 days at my standard rate. Bryn negotiated, which I respected. She got 30 seconds off the hourly, which I allowed, because a woman learning to negotiate deserves a small win. The heating unit has been repaired, through Everett's brother-in-law's company, restored to the original rate after a conversation I had with Everett that took 4 minutes and a genuine apology from Clarence on behalf of the household. Donna has not come back, which I understand, but she agreed to train her replacement on the mailing list, and that was enough. Clarence has his Wednesdays. The oak tree Robert planted the year Warren was born is coming into leaf again. The new growth very green and slightly tentative the way new things are before they trust the season. I can see it from the kitchen window in the mornings when I am making my coffee, the good kind, the Ethiopian blend that is entirely worth the trouble. Bryn stopped by the kitchen last Tuesday, her own initiative, not mine, and asked if I would teach her my pot roast. I looked at her for a moment. She looked back, without the brightness, without the gloss, without the silk robe and the practiced expression. Just a woman, 39 years old, who had learned something the hard way and was standing in a kitchen asking to learn something the right way. "Tuesday is a good day for it," I said. I got out the rosemary. We started at the beginning.